In this episode, it's finally time to pick a prototype and turn it into a real game. But before I go ahead, I'm gonna need to find the right engine for the job. Unless we don't need an engine at all. In the last episode, I entered the Raylib Next Game Jam, making a game in 7 days with C++ and Raylib. And my game Daisy Trains ended up getting second place in the jam.
That's marvelous.
After the jam, I decided it was time to go back through the year's prototypes and see if one might be good enough to turn into a real game. We're in here with an exciting stream where we're going to be reviewing things and considering options. Before choosing, I thought I'd go through each prototype and write down why it may or may not be a good candidate to make into a game. The first prototype was Turn-Based Survivors, which was a bit of a warm-up idea to get the dev skills cooking. And then there was Nature Game, where you try to grow a forest and protect it from invaders. Whoa, these dudes are moonwalking! I have no idea what's going on in this game. I'd even experimented with a little Nature Game prototype using Raylib. Then there was Cat Game, although there wasn't a lot to it. Dog game, cat game, chase the cats into the goal. That's the game. Rat Game was an entry to the Ludum Dare 55 Game Jam, and it was a lot of fun, but I felt like it was already in its final form. Then I went off the deep end and spent 6 months building my space game prototype with Raylib, which was very compelling as a project, but the actual game idea was still a bit of a question mark. You can generate new levels. You can create, debug, you can create a lot of centipedes. That's what I'm talking about, engine performance. Out of all the prototypes, 2 were standing out as having the most potential, Nature Game and Daisy Trains. I did a bit more analysis of both of the games and after some deliberation came to the conclusion that Daisy Trains might be the best candidate for development. I had a few ideas on how I could expand on the prototype, and the first thing was to make it 3D. And while I would love to make Daisy Trains with a custom engine, I didn't want to rule out using an existing engine, especially if it was going to help me make a better game and actually complete it. So before getting into development, I thought I'd test out a few engines and see if I could make some basic building blocks in 3D. Something that you could do in like a day or so, a day or two, and then see which one. I don't know if that will really answer the question. Starting with Gdau. I thought I'd start by making some placeholder assets in Blender and have a go using geometry nodes to make some modular rail pieces. Trim curve. Start and end. Oh baby! And then we can reduce the count and... I mocked up a level in Blender to test out a block-based world and see if everything would line up. There, and put it there. Oh, there's math issues. Massive issues. Excited to be back in an actual editor with actual tools, I experimented with the grid map in Gdau, which is like a tile map but 3D. I thought it might be good for level design, but I was eager to get started on the gameplay. First thing to do is learn how to write GDScript. GDScript was a bit of an adjustment after working in C++ for so long. Page not found. Nice. Once I got back into the swing of things, I tried to build a basic rail placement system. Boom! Ha, we're building rails. I'm back in Daisy Trains, man. For the trains, I grabbed some Kenny assets, and to make them move, I looked into the Gdau curve objects, which could be placed on each rail section with an in and out point, and then you could animate the train along the curve. This seemed like a good idea at first, but turned out to be not so great. More on that later. I went with a similar system to the original Daisy Trains, where trains would move from one tile to the next, in point to out point, and so on. Then all we need to do is parent this to the thing, to move it along, get the next thing, and then do the thing, and then do the thing, and then do the thing.
What in God's holy name are you blathering about?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm blathering about.
There was a lot of trial and error to try and figure out the 3D transformations of the in and out points. Wow! It's sliding out, dog. All it took was serious pain. Eventually I got the single train engine running along the track, and it didn't take too long. It was reasonably doable in Gdau. However, I had a couple of concerns. While at first the 3D grid map seemed like a good fit, I would need it to store more data per cell than the tool supported out of the box, and using curves to animate the trains meant that only one object could be a child of the path follow node at a time, so it wouldn't be straightforward for trains and cars. Performance seems to be just fine. I mean, I don't know how many things we're doing. The calculations aren't too crazy. While it was very fast to get up and running, I was concerned that the tools I had used might turn out to be a thorn in my side down the track, though I'm sure solutions could be found. Next up, I wanted to give Unreal a shot, mainly because I wanted to see if my recent C++ education might help, and you may think that using Unreal for daisy trains might be like fishing with dynamite, and you might be right. Unreal just looks so cool. Wow, it's sunset. On the stream, I was asked why I wasn't using C++ with Unreal, and from my very few experiences, I'd found the process to be a bit tricky with setting up the dev environment and the workflow, so I figured I'd just see how far I could get with blueprints. Come here expecting cool coding and end up with drawing pictures. In Gdau, I was getting the tile under the mouse by casting a ray from the camera into the world, and when I tried to do the same in Unreal, the advice I found online was a bit varied and I couldn't get it to work. Then it turned out that there's just a node that gets the object under the mouse. Unreal is kind of like that. It often has a tool for the job, but weirdly it didn't show up in any online searches, so maybe I was asking the wrong questions. That was a little easier. I then found out that blueprints are full of stuff that is genuinely helpful to the programmer. And on the other hand, Unreal is also full of complicated systems. Axis and action mappings are now deprecated. Please use enhanced input actions and input mapping contexts. And every other thing in the world, you just go get mouse button. In my first stream, I managed to get some terrain blocks in and a simple rail placement system, just like the Gdau one. I started experimenting with trying to create a more in-depth rail system that could manage rail lines and maybe create dynamic splines to animate the trains. However, as I got deeper into the systems, it started to feel like a cumbersome task for blueprints, so I started to set up some C++ stuff. It was here I had to take a break to work on some video stuff, and when I came back I felt a little bit lost. So I just decided to call it there for Unreal. Unreal was a lot more easy to use with some C++ knowledge, so I would definitely recommend learning some C++ if you're thinking about using Unreal or learning the software in the future.
Not this time.
The final test was to try and make something with Raylib, but this time I'd restrict myself to plain C. I wanted to learn more about the language and wean myself off some of the crutches I had used in C++ due to lack of general programming knowledge. I did the first part of the project off stream as I was getting up to speed with C and using Raylib's 3D tools, and in stark contrast to working with an engine, I was starting from the ground floor, so my first experiment was to make a 3D grid system similar to the Gdau grid map. But because I was working with the data directly, I could make each cell store all the data that I needed for daisy trains. Working with C was challenging, but after a while it became kinda nice to be limited to the basics. Absolute F is not a function. That's another cool thing about C, is it's like, it lets you write a function, put it in there, and it's like, alright, I don't know what this function is, but let's compile it. So there is no absolute F? Is there fabs? There should be. There is! It also helped me see the rail system from a new perspective, and rather than the rail state coming from the cells, or the rail pieces themselves, I experimented with a separate grid structure that would store the rail connections. This was a bit tricky as it needed to be a diamond grid and interact with the main grid, but I got it working after a while, and felt confident enough to get back into streaming this process. There it is! Rockers! How long are we going for? Nearly 2 hours. We're going to in a minute. It's pretty good. When working with an engine, I had started with the object first, like the rail piece, and then tried to build the system around that. Whereas this way, I was working with the data first, and once the data structures were set up, I could then just render each rail piece in place. You know, this doesn't take as long in Unreal and whatnot, but it's way more satisfying this way. Look at that! Ding, 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 ding. For the trains, I was sticking with the same point-to-point interpolation, but I was thinking of a better way to animate the cars on the track. We need some real engineers up in here. We need some actual engineers. In the original Daisy trains, each car would just manage itself, and that led to weird spaced out trains, but I'd thought up a way to offset the cars across each connection programmatically. But first, I had to learn a bit about 3D transformations and matrices, which Raylib does have some support for. Everything does take a little longer without an engine, but it does make you work things out for yourself, which I guess leads to a good understanding of your own systems. Harder to do it without an engine, but weirdly we're fixing more problems without an engine. Obviously we've had the benefit of doing it already in an engine, so yeah buddy, what are we doing it? It's just perfect. Let's get him on a loop and dissect what's going on here. Oh dude. yeah oh dude, man, dude. So it does that one. Up. No, sir. Sir, no, sir. Doing it. The trains. There's like some Super Mario dancing. Whoa. Yeah. It's been the whole stream going, I need a game engine, I can't do it, this sucks, I don't know how matrices work, I'm bad, how do you do the thing, I don't know. You get to the end and go, I don't need a game engine, look what I did. Another perk of building the grid structures myself was that it was reasonably simple to output a mesh file that I could load into Blender. My theory was that I could create level art based on the grid and keep the underlying data to interact with the game systems. For the last stream of the year, I thought I'd have a go doing a level art test and trying to implement lighting based on the Raylib simple PBR example. Turns out this was a little more complex than it seemed on the surface. Surprise, surprise.
It might not be just such a simple, you know?
We have a cheese world. We've got a cheese world! Oh, we're lit. We are lit. After a long period of enabling and disabling things, I finally got some very rudimentary shading working for the world and the train, and for a final touch added a janky train follow for the camera. So after testing out Gdau, Unreal, and then building from scratch with Raylib, each solution had its pros and cons. I think daisy trains could definitely be made in any game engine, however I did find that it was easier to get down to the nitty gritty with Raylib and C. It's hard to say which approach would result in the best game while offering a compelling and fun development process. But so far, I have definitely enjoyed using Raylib and C the most. In the next episode, it's a brand new year and a brand new-ish project with Daisy Trains 3D. I get to work setting up a new project and rebuilding my prototype into a more cohesive program. So get ready for an exciting year of writing code. In a platform. Oh wait, this is, I am in C.